The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian Global Import's downtown Chicago office, casting long shadows across the polished granite floors. I sat at my desk in the International Contracts Division, carefully reviewing a manufacturing agreement with our suppliers in Guadalajara. The familiar rhythm of Spanish legal terminology flowed through my mind as I caught 3 critical mistranslations that could have cost the company millions. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The document in front of me looked simple enough, a standard equipment lease agreement. But buried in paragraph 17 was a clause that the previous translator had completely botched. They'd translated responsabilidad solidaria as shared responsibility when it actually meant joint and several liability, a difference that could expose Meridian to unlimited financial damages if their Mexican partners defaulted. I made the correction, adding a detailed note about the legal implications. It was my 3rd save this week. Last Monday, I'd caught a mistranslation that would have accidentally transferred intellectual property rights to a competitor. Wednesday, I'd prevented a diplomatic disaster when someone tried to address the elderly CEO of our Bolivian textile partner using the informal tú instead of the respectful usted. My cubicle was a small fortress of cultural artifacts that told the story of my work: a hand-carved wooden cross from Don Fernando's wife in Mexico City, a small flag from Guatemala that the textile workers had signed after I helped them negotiate better working conditions, and a framed photo of me with the Herrera family at their factory inauguration. These weren't just business trophies, they were proof that I'd built something deeper than contracts. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, teaching me the subtle differences between Mexican business Spanish and the formal Castilian I'd learned at Northwestern. Mija, she'd say, stirring her cafe while I practiced conjugations at her kitchen table. Language is like cooking. Same ingredients, but if you don't know the family recipe, it tastes like cardboard. That blend of academic precision and cultural intuition had made me invaluable to Meridian Global for the past 4 years. While other translators handled words, I translated relationships, navigating the invisible web of respect, hierarchy, and tradition that kept international business flowing smoothly. I remember my first week at Meridian, when I was just another entry-level translator fresh out of graduate school. The company had just lost a major automotive parts contract with a supplier in Tijuana because of what the previous translator called a minor cultural misunderstanding. The supplier's patriarch, Don Alejandro Vargas, had been so insulted by the casual tone of American correspondence that he'd terminated a 5-year relationship worth $8 million annually. My supervisor at the time, Jennifer Walsh, had handed me the file like a live grenade. "See if you can salvage this," she'd said. "Corporate is breathing down our necks." I'd spent 3 days researching the Vargas family history, their position in the Tijuana business community, and the specific formal register that would show proper respect. Then I'd written a letter that acknowledged the cultural breach, expressed genuine remorse in language that honored Don Alejandro's position as an elder, and requested the opportunity to rebuild trust through actions, not just words. The letter worked. Not only did Don Alejandro restore the contract, but he'd recommended Meridian to 6 other suppliers in his network. That's when Jennifer had realized she had something special on her hands. The elevator chimed, and Rebecca Sterling emerged like she owned the building. Designer heels clicked against the marble floor with military precision. She was our new vice president of operations, fresh from a multinational consulting firm in Manhattan. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and sharp suit screamed corporate ambition, and her cold blue eyes swept the office like a general surveying troops. Rebecca had arrived 3 months ago with a mandate from corporate to optimize operational efficiency and enhance client relationships. Translation: cut costs and look good doing it. She'd already eliminated the executive assistant pool, outsourced IT support to a call center in Ohio, and replaced our artisanal coffee service with a vending machine that dispensed liquid disappointment. But I'd noticed something else in those 3 months. Rebecca only spoke English. She'd nod politely during presentations about our Latin American partnerships, but I could see the glazed look in her eyes when we discussed cultural protocols or regional business customs. She viewed our international relationships like spreadsheet entries, numbers to be optimized, inefficiencies to be eliminated. During her first all-hands meeting, she'd presented a PowerPoint about streamlining communication channels and leveraging scalable solutions. When Maria Santos from our Colombian coffee importers had asked about maintaining personal relationships with suppliers, Rebecca had smiled condescendingly and said, "Business is business, regardless of geography." The room had gone quiet. Those of us who actually worked with international partners knew that for our Latin American clients, business was never just business. It was family, honor, tradition, and respect wrapped up in commercial agreements. Carmen Rodriguez, she called out, not bothering with pleasantries. My office. Now. The tone was unmistakable. I'd heard it before, usually right before someone cleared out their desk. I saved my work and followed her past the maze of cubicles. Conversations quieted as we walked. Everyone had heard the rumors about Rebecca's efficiency initiatives at her previous company, a 40% staff reduction achieved through what she called strategic restructuring. Marco Gutierrez, my cubicle neighbor and one of the few other bilingual employees, gave me a worried glance as we passed. He'd been with Meridian for 8 years, handling Portuguese translations for our Brazilian suppliers. If Rebecca was coming for me, he'd be next. The walk felt like a march to execution, past the conference room where I'd negotiated our biggest contract last year, past the break room where I'd taught half the sales team basic Spanish greetings for client calls, past the wall of international awards that Meridian had won for outstanding cross-cultural business excellence, awards I'd helped earn but never received credit for. Her corner office reeked of expensive leather and fresh paint. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space, and behind it hung her MBA from Wharton like a battle flag. The walls displayed her other credentials, a certificate from some executive leadership program at Harvard, a photo of her shaking hands with a governor whose name I couldn't quite make out, and a motivational poster that read, "Excellence is not a skill, it's an attitude." What struck me most was what wasn't there: no international artifacts, no photos with diverse teams, no evidence that she'd ever worked outside the American corporate bubble. This was the office of someone who saw the world through spreadsheets and profit margins. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, then settled into her executive throne with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally cornered their prey. "Carmen," she began, her voice sharp and clinical, "I've been reviewing your client interactions and presentations." She opened a thick folder with my name printed on the tab. I could see printed emails, performance reviews, and what looked like transcripts of recorded calls. "Your work quality is adequate. But we have an image problem." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd seen this movie before. "Your accent," she continued, leaning back in her chair like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument, "is unprofessional. Our clients expect a certain polish. When you speak to our Fortune 500 partners, you sound like..." She paused, searching for words that would cut deepest. "Like you just crossed the border yesterday." The words hit like ice water, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard variations of this poison my entire career, from professors who questioned my intelligence to colleagues who spoke slower when addressing me, as if volume could bridge the gap between their ignorance and my competence. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mrs. Patterson from Consolidated Industries mentioned it specifically. Rebecca continued, consulting her notes with theatrical precision. "She said your pronunciation made it difficult to follow your presentation on the textile import regulations." I almost laughed. Mrs. Patterson. The same woman who'd called me 3 times last month, practically begging for help when her company's previous translator had mistranslated a liability clause that nearly got them sued for $2 million. The same woman who'd sent a fruit basket to my desk with a note calling me a lifesaver. But I said nothing. Let Rebecca weave her fiction. "I'm implementing new client-facing protocols," Rebecca continued, pulling out a second folder thick with organizational charts and policy documents. "All international correspondence will go through our consulting partners at Whitman and Associates. They'll handle the presentations while you focus on back-end translation work." She slid a revised job description across the desk like a death warrant. My title had been downgraded from Senior International Communications Specialist to Translation Services Coordinator. My salary was being reduced by 15%, my client contact privileges revoked, and my office access limited to basic translation tasks. I was being buried alive in paperwork while a team of monolingual consultants would take credit for relationships I'd spent years building. "The transition will be immediate," Rebecca added, clearly enjoying the power dynamic. "Whitman and Associates will take over all client presentations starting Monday. You'll brief them on the basic requirements, and they'll handle the sophisticated client interface work." Sophisticated. The word hung in the air like a slap. "Any questions?" she asked, her smile sharp as broken glass. I stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. In that moment, I could have told her about the Morales family's invitation to their daughter's quinceañera, proof that business relationships had become personal bonds. I could have mentioned the handwritten thank you letters from suppliers, the cultural training I'd provided to half the sales team, or the 3 contract disasters I'd prevented just this week. Instead, I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then spoke in the clearest, most deliberately accented English. I could manage. No questions, I said, rolling my R's with precision. Muchas gracias for the clarity. Her smirk widened, satisfied that she'd put me in my place. She had no idea she'd just set the timer on her own professional destruction. That evening, I sat in my apartment in Pilsen, surrounded by the sounds of my neighborhood, children playing in Spanish, the distant music from the corner market, the comfortable rhythm of home. My abuela's picture watched me from the mantel, her weathered hands folded in prayer, next to photos of my graduation from Northwestern and my first day at Meridian. She had cleaned offices for 30 years so I could have this opportunity. She never spoke perfect English, but she understood more about dignity than Rebecca Sterling ever would. La dignidad no es vende, mija, she used to say while helping me with homework at her kitchen table. Dignity isn't for sale. I opened my laptop and began typing my resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice, professional and brief. But I also started something else, a detailed inventory of every critical mistranslation, cultural nuance, and relationship I'd built with our Latin American partners. Knowledge that existed nowhere in Meridian's files. The document grew to 47 pages. Birthdays of key executives' children. Preferred greetings for different regions. Religious holidays that affected business operations. Family histories that influenced negotiation styles. The subtle differences between Mexican, Colombian, and Guatemalan business protocols. Warning signs for cultural missteps that could torpedo deals. This wasn't corporate sabotage, it was professional documentation of institutional knowledge that Meridian had never bothered to systematize. They'd treated my expertise like a renewable resource, never realizing it was built on relationships that couldn't be transferred to a consulting firm's template. The truth was, Rebecca had made a fundamental error that would take months to fully manifest. She assumed language was just words swapped for other words, like running a document through Google Translate and calling it professional communication. She didn't understand that I wasn't just translating contracts, I was translating cultures, building trust, navigating family relationships that went back generations in these business partnerships. Take the Morales family in Mexico City, our biggest textile supplier. Don Fernando wasn't just a vendor, he was the patriarch of a business dynasty that controlled 40% of Mexico's high-end textile exports. They didn't just see me as a translator. I was the goddaughter they'd never met, the daughter who understood both worlds. When old Don Fernando had a heart attack last year, I'd called his wife personally, speaking in the gentle diminutives that showed proper respect for her pain. I'd arranged for flowers to be delivered with a card written in the formal condolence language that honored their loss appropriately. When their daughter graduated from university with a degree in international business, I'd sent congratulations, written in the ceremonial style that acknowledged her achievement as a family triumph. These gestures weren't just politeness, they were investments in relationships that generated millions in revenue. The Morales family didn't just buy from American suppliers. They recommended them to their network of 37 other Mexican textile companies. Or consider my relationship with the Herrera Automotive Parts Factory in Monterrey. Their eldest son, Miguel, had been struggling with his English presentations to American buyers. I'd spent hours after work coaching him, not just on vocabulary but on cultural cues, how American businessmen interpret eye contact, why they prefer direct communication over the polite indirectness valued in Mexican culture, how to phrase disagreements without causing offense. Last quarter, Miguel had closed the biggest deal in his company's history with Ford Motor Company. A $12 million contract that had come through Meridian. His father, Don Carlos, had personally called me to express gratitude, and the family had sent a handcrafted leather briefcase with my initials embossed in gold. These weren't just business relationships. They were cultural bridges built over years of patient, careful communication. And Rebecca was about to burn them all down with corporate efficiency and Whitman and Associates' cookie-cutter approach. I spent my final week at Meridian quietly preparing for the earthquake I knew was coming. I updated my contact information with our key partners, mentioning casually that I was exploring new opportunities, but would always be available to help them navigate any challenges. I helped train the Whitman and Associates team, watching them fumble through basic Spanish phrases while taking notes on cultural protocols they'd never understand. The Whitman team consisted of 3 consultants, Jenkins, Thompson, and Bradley. All 3 were Harvard MBAs with impressive resumes and zero international experience. Jenkins, their lead consultant, actually asked me if there was a difference between Mexican Spanish and regular Spanish. I explained regional variations for 20 minutes before realizing he'd stopped listening after the first sentence. Thompson insisted that Buenos dias was appropriate for all business communications, regardless of time of day or level of formality. When I tried to explain the importance of very good morning versus good afternoon in formal correspondence, he waved me off and said, "Spanish is Spanish. We'll use translation software for the details." Bradley seemed more promising at first, asking detailed questions about contract terminology and cultural protocols. But then he asked if I could create a cheat sheet of Spanish phrases that would cover all the important business situations. When I explained that effective cross-cultural communication couldn't be reduced to a laminated card, he looked at me like I was deliberately complicating things. These were the people Rebecca trusted to maintain relationships that had taken me years to build. On Tuesday of my final week, I had a conference call with Don Fernando to discuss renewal terms for their textile contract. It should have been a routine conversation. We'd renewed this contract 4 times over the past 8 years. But this time, something felt different. "Carmen, mi hija," he said, using the affectionate term that meant both my daughter and showed deep respect. "There are rumors that you might be leaving Meridian. Is this true?" I chose my words carefully, speaking in the formal register that acknowledged his position while expressing honest uncertainty about my future. "Don Fernando, I am exploring new opportunities that might better utilize my skills. But regardless of where I work, my commitment to our relationship remains unchanged." There was a long pause. Then, in the careful tone he used for serious business discussions, "Carmen, you understand that our family has worked with Meridian because of you. Your integrity, your respect for our culture. If you are no longer there," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. On Thursday, I had similar conversations with Miguel Herrera and Elena Vasquez from our Guatemalan coffee importers. Each conversation followed the same pattern: personal warmth, business concerns, and subtle questions about my future. They weren't just checking on contract details, they were taking my temperature, gauging whether their American partner was still worthy of trust. Friday afternoon, my last day, was oddly anticlimactic. Rebecca had scheduled a transition meeting where I was supposed to brief the Whitman team on essential protocols. The meeting lasted 30 minutes, with Jenkins taking notes on a legal pad while Thompson checked his phone and Bradley asked if we could wrap this up quickly. I presented them with a condensed version of my cultural protocols document, 20 pages of critical do's and don'ts for maintaining relationships with our Latin American partners. Jenkins flipped through it quickly and said, "This seems pretty comprehensive. We'll take it from here." When I mentioned that Don Fernando's family expected personal calls on religious holidays and that the Herrera family required formal written correspondence for all contract modifications, Thompson interrupted, "We'll handle relationship management our way. Meridian hired us for our expertise." I boxed up my personal items, a small Mexican flag my grandmother had given me, photos from client visits to manufacturing facilities, thank you cards written in elegant Spanish script from partners who'd become friends, and the leather briefcase from the Herrera family. No one threw me a farewell party. Rebecca had made sure the transition was seamless and professional. As I cleaned out my desk, Marco stopped by with a troubled expression. "Carmen, I'm scared," he said quietly. "If they can get rid of you, what chance do I have? My Portuguese accounts are smaller, but they're asking the same questions the Mexican families are asking. What happens to our relationships when we're gone?" I looked at my friend, a man who'd built similar bridges with Brazilian suppliers, who understood the same cultural nuances I did, and felt a surge of anger at Rebecca's blindness. "Marco," I said, "document everything. Every relationship, every cultural detail, every personal connection. Make sure it exists somewhere besides your memory." He nodded, understanding the implications. I walked out of Meridian Global at sunset. My personal items in a simple cardboard box. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches. Just a quiet exit that would soon echo like thunder through the company's international operations. As I drove home through the Chicago traffic, my phone buzzed with a text from Don Fernando's son Eduardo. "Carmen, Papa wants to know if you'll be at Maria's quinceañera next month. The family is hoping you can still make it, regardless of your work situation." I smiled and texted back, "I wouldn't miss it. Save me a dance." They had no idea I was already planning my new life around relationships that Rebecca thought were expendable. 3 weeks later, I was sipping café con leche at a sidewalk cafe in Little Village, reviewing contracts for my new freelance clients, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marco, my former cubicle neighbor. "Carmen, you need to know, the Morales deal fell through. Don Fernando's family won't sign anything. They keep asking where you went. Rebecca's been calling them personally, but they just hang up when they realize it's not you." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into golden patterns. Of course they wouldn't sign. In their culture, business was personal. When I disappeared without explanation, it wasn't just losing a translator, it was betrayal of trust, abandonment of family. Don Fernando probably felt like his goddaughter had abandoned him without even saying goodbye. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sophia from accounting. 3 more Latin American contracts terminated this week. The Herrera family in Monterrey sent all their equipment back. They won't even take Rebecca's calls. She's having a meltdown in conference room B. I could picture the scene, Rebecca standing at the whiteboard, trying to analyze the metrics of relationship failure while completely missing the human element that drove those numbers. Then came the flood, messages from former colleagues painting a picture of escalating disaster. The Whitman and Associates consultants had made every cultural mistake I'd spent years helping Meridian avoid. They'd addressed elderly Mexican businessmen with casual familiarity, using first names and slang that would make a teenager cringe. They'd scheduled critical meetings during religious holidays. They'd mistranslated technical specifications so badly that an entire shipment of machinery arrived configured for the wrong voltage, but the mistakes went deeper than language. Thompson had apparently tried to streamline negotiations with the Guatemalan coffee cooperative by skipping the traditional relationship-building conversation and jumping straight to price discussions. In Guatemalan business culture, this was equivalent to walking into someone's home and demanding to buy their furniture without introducing yourself. The cooperative's leader, Elena Vasquez, had been so insulted that she'd not only terminated their contract but had written a formal letter to the Guatemala Chamber of Commerce warning other exporters about Meridian's cultural insensitivity and lack of professional respect. Jenkins had made an even worse error with the Brazilian automotive suppliers. He'd attempted to use Google Translate for a critical contract modification, not realizing that Brazilian legal Portuguese requires specific terminology that differs significantly from Spanish. The resulting document was so incomprehensible that the suppliers thought Meridian was trying to defraud them, but the real earthquake came when Don Fernando's nephew, Eduardo, reached out to me directly on LinkedIn. "Carmen, we want to work with you again. Can you help us find a new American partner? One that understands respect? We have 5 other Mexican companies interested in your recommendations." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something shift deep in my chest. I wasn't just a translator anymore. I was the bridge these companies trusted, the cultural ambassador they needed. Rebecca had handed me the greatest gift possible, my freedom and their loyalty. Within a month, I'd established Rodriguez International Consulting from my kitchen table. The business plan was simple: provide the cultural expertise and relationship management that American companies desperately needed but consistently undervalued. My first client was the Morales Group, who contracted me to help them find new American partners who valued cultural competency. The irony was perfect. Don Fernando's family was now paying me more per month than Meridian had paid me per quarter, and all I had to do was introduce them to companies that understood basic respect. My second client was Elena Vasquez's Guatemalan Coffee Cooperative. They hired me to help them navigate American business culture while maintaining their traditional values. Within 2 weeks, I'd connected them with an artisanal coffee roaster in Portland whose owners spoke fluent Spanish and had actually visited Guatemala to understand the farming process. The third client was unexpected: Mrs. Patterson from Consolidated Industries. She called me directly, bypassing Meridian entirely. "Carmen," she said during our first conversation, "I don't know what happened over there, but working with that new team is like trying to conduct an orchestra with a hammer. Can you handle all our Latin American communications going forward?" It turned out that Rebecca's efficiency initiative had created chaos at Consolidated too. The Whitman team had mistranslated a critical safety specification for machinery they were importing from Mexico, creating potential liability issues that could have shut down their entire Southwest operation. They handed me a contract that said our Mexican suppliers were responsible for shared responsibility instead of joint and several liability. Mrs. Patterson explained. "Do you know how much money that could have cost us if something went wrong?" I knew exactly how much: potentially unlimited damages. It was the same mistranslation I'd caught and corrected 3 times in my final months at Meridian. By my 3rd month in business, I was earning more than I had at Meridian, working with clients who appreciated my expertise instead of tolerating it. But the universe wasn't finished with its poetic justice. The breaking point came when Marco called me with panic in his voice. "Carmen, Rebecca just fired me. She says the Brazilian accounts are underperforming and that outsourcing Portuguese translation will be more cost-effective. But I know what really happened: 3 major suppliers terminated their contracts this week, and she needed someone to blame." I listened as Marco described the same cultural disasters happening with the Brazilian partners. The Whitman team had tried to apply their Mexican expertise to Brazilian business culture, not understanding that Portuguese business protocols are completely different from Spanish ones. The worst part, Marco continued, is that she's brought in this new consulting firm called Global Business Solutions. They wanted standardized international communications using AI translation software and template responses. I hung up the phone feeling something between rage and satisfaction. Rebecca was systematically destroying everything that had made Meridian successful in international markets, and she was doing it with the confidence of someone who thought expertise was interchangeable. That's when Eduardo Morales called with an opportunity that would change everything. Carmen, he said, his voice excited, my father has been talking to other textile families. They want to form a consortium, a group buying arrangement that could bring American companies billions in business. But they only want to work with partners who demonstrate real cultural understanding. Would you be interested in helping us structure this? The consortium represented 12 Mexican textile families, with combined annual revenues of over $400 million. They wanted to create a formal partnership with American importers, but only with companies that could prove their commitment to respectful business relationships. I became the cultural consultant for the entire consortium, helping them evaluate potential American partners and providing ongoing relationship management. The contract was worth more per year than my entire Meridian salary had been, but the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when an email arrived that made me set down my coffee and stare at the screen. It was from James Patterson, a bankruptcy attorney I knew from my early freelance days. Carmen, I have a rush job. Corporate bankruptcy filing, lots of international debt documentation in Spanish and Portuguese. Client needs everything translated for court proceedings. They specifically requested you because of your legal translation background and familiarity with their contracts. The company is called Meridian Global Import. I leaned back in my chair, letting the symmetry wash over me. Rebecca's efficiency initiatives had stripped away everything that made Meridian profitable. Without their Latin American partnerships, they'd hemorrhaged money faster than a punctured tanker. The Whitman and Associates consulting fees had bled them dry while producing nothing but cultural disasters and terminated contracts. The Global Business Solutions AI translation experiment had been the final nail in the coffin. They'd attempted to automate relationship management, sending template emails translated by software to partners who valued personal connection above everything else. I quoted my premium bankruptcy rate, $250 per hour with a 40-hour minimum for complex international debt documentation. They accepted without negotiation, desperate for someone who actually understood the legal terminology and cultural context of their international debts. For 3 weeks, I worked through Meridian's financial wreckage, translating debt documents, supplier termination notices, and legal complaints from former partners. Each page told the story of relationships destroyed, trust shattered, and bridges burned by arrogance disguised as professionalism. The most devastating document was a formal letter from the Herrera family's attorney, written in the ornate legal Spanish that showed maximum disrespect. They weren't just terminating their contract, they were publicly severing all business relationships and warning other Mexican companies about Meridian's lack of cultural integrity and professional dignity. The letter included a detailed catalog of cultural offenses, addressing elderly executives with casual familiarity, scheduling meetings during religious holidays, mistranslating technical specifications, and failing to acknowledge family traditions. But the most damning section described how Meridian had abandoned their cultural ambassador without explanation or respect, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of business honor. As I translated those carefully chosen words, I could hear my grandmother's voice, La dignidad no es y vende, mija. Pero la falta de dignidad siempre se paga. Dignity isn't for sale, but the lack of dignity always comes due. The bankruptcy documents revealed the full scope of Rebecca's destruction. In 18 months, she'd managed to eliminate 80% of Meridian's international revenue. The consulting fees paid to Whitman and Associates and Global Business Solutions had cost more than my entire department's annual budget. The legal costs from mistranslated contracts had reached $3.20 million, but the most telling detail was hidden in the financial statements. Rebecca had given herself 2 raises during the same period she'd been streamlining operations. While cutting my salary by 15%, she'd increased her own compensation by 35%. The day I delivered the final translations, I included a professional cover letter addressed to Rebecca Sterling. It was written in flawless English, every word precisely chosen. Miss Sterling, please find attached the complete translation of Meridian Global Import's international debt documentation for bankruptcy proceedings. All cultural context and legal nuances have been preserved in the translation, as requested by the court. The documents reveal total international debt of $47.3 million, with specific liability claims from 12 Latin American partners citing Cultural insensitivity and breach of relationship protocols as grounds for contract termination. I have included detailed footnotes explaining the cultural significance of various complaints, as these nuances may be relevant to the court's understanding of the dissolution timeline. Thank you for this opportunity to serve my community with my unprofessional accent. Professionally yours, Carmen Rodriguez, MBA, Certified Legal Translator. Rodriguez International Consulting P.S. The Morales Textile Consortium sends their regards. I never heard back from her directly. But Marco texted me a week later with a photo from LinkedIn. Rebecca's profile now showed her as seeking new opportunities, with a generic corporate headshot that couldn't hide the defeat in her eyes. The comments section was brutal. Former Meridian employees sharing their own stories of her leadership style. According to Marco, who'd heard from Sophia in accounting, Rebecca had tried to blame the bankruptcy on market forces and unforeseen economic challenges. But the board of directors had found emails proving she'd been warned repeatedly about the cultural relationship issues. Her termination package was minimal, just 2 weeks severance, the same she'd offered me. As for me, I built something she could never understand or destroy. My business thrived on the very thing she'd tried to erase: authenticity, cultural pride, and the understanding that in a global economy, respect isn't just professional courtesy. It's survival. 6 months after Meridian's bankruptcy, I received a handwritten letter from Don Fernando's wife. In an elegant Spanish script, she thanked me for helping them find new American partners who treated their family with respect. At the bottom, she'd included a photo from their daughter's wedding, a beautiful ceremony I'd been invited to attend as family. Today, Rodriguez International Consulting works with companies across 3 continents. The Morales Textile Consortium has grown to include families from Guatemala, Colombia, and Peru. We've helped them establish partnerships with 15 American companies, generating over $200 million in annual trade revenue. I speak to Fortune 500 executives in my natural voice, my grandmother's strength flowing through every presentation. My accent isn't unprofessional, it's my competitive advantage, proof that I can navigate worlds Rebecca Sterling will never understand. The best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's building something so successful from their rejection that their opinion becomes irrelevant. True expertise doesn't need anyone's validation, and the market never forgets who really knows how to build bridges instead of burning them. Last month, I spoke at the International Business Cultural Competency Conference in Miami. The keynote address was titled, "Why Authentic Voices Matter in Global Commerce." In the audience, I noticed several former Meridian executives taking notes. After my presentation, a young Latina woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, "I'm a translator at a logistics company in Houston. My boss keeps telling me my accent makes me sound unprofessional. After hearing your story, I think I know what I need to do." I handed her my business card and smiled. "Mia," I said, using my grandmother's voice, "never let anyone convince you that your voice isn't valuable. Sometimes the market just needs time to remember what real expertise sounds like." Rebecca Sterling had tried to erase my voice. Instead, she'd given me the freedom to let it echo across continents. And now, I was teaching others to find their own voices too. The lesson she'd never learned was simple: in a globalized world, authenticity isn't a liability. It's the most valuable currency of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And, hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.